come on in because I know people are going to be coming in the next few minutes. But I hope everybody is here, and Rosalind and Ann and Karen, I hope you're also there as well. But it's nice to see you all again here this week, thinking about Judaism and the vanguard of the future. Hello, Karen, we're going to think about questions of genetic engineering and has CRISPR and genetic engineering allowed us to play God? These are the questions. We've been thinking about this question of playing God a lot throughout a lot of our classes. At the very beginning, when we were thinking about the role of technology and Joseph Soloveitchik and the ways in which we are creative and that technology is so integrated in what it means to be human. Questions of genetics and genetic technology are very similar in a lot of ways to the questions of AI, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and also thinking about cosmology, raising this question of what does it mean to be human? Then when we think about technology, we're often thinking about questions of gaining more knowledge and gaining more power. And that is one of the things where genetic technology and genetic engineering are really enhancing. They're giving us a tremendous amount more knowledge and a lot more power. And I actually want to start. I'm going to send a link. I don't know if people are subscribers to the New York Times. Hopefully you can do this little quiz. If not, I'm going to share my screen. This is a quiz that the New York Times did. It is now almost 7 years ago. I think it is still pretty accurate, some of these questions. As we think about CRISPR-Cas9 technology, which you probably have heard of in the last few years. It's a relatively new technology. If you think in the last 50 years, it's not as new in the last 5 or 6. It is a technology that allows us to be able to make some edits to our genes, and it's a question of what we're able to do medically, what we're able to do in terms of editing genes for currently, for the future. There's medical technology, there's enhancement technology. That's the thing that we're going to be looking at a lot as well. Can we use medical technology? I think many people would agree that we all in some ways use medical technology for therapy in some capacity, right? I hope this is okay. I think everyone here is a little bit older than I am in here, but I take various medications, as I'm assuming many of you do in some way. That is a form of technology, right? If you were to not have that form of medical technology, your life would either not be as long as it is, or it would not be as productive or as valuable. So we have the ability, we celebrate of medical therapy. That's something that we and almost every Jewish legal decisor, almost every rabbi says, yes, medical therapy is incredibly valuable. And yes, right there, and we'll talk about this. There's some texts that there's no question that in Judaism, one of the highest values is pikuach nefesh, of saving a life. Almost anything that helps you save a life, that is not only allowed, that's encouraged. The question becomes, what about medical enhancement? These are questions where it becomes a little bit more complicated. Can you use medical technology to be able to go, if here's where your baseline is, if here's where baseline is, medical therapy is always good if you're down below to be able to bring yourself up to baseline. Most people agree that medical technology bringing us from down here to here, that's okay. But if we're already at baseline and we use medical technology to enhance ourselves, is that okay? Right? Everyone understands the distinction between those two. And it's not a bright line. But I think one of the things that we need to think about is what is actually doable and what is not actually doable in of medical technology. So I'm going to put it through the chat here, and then I'll also share my screen so people can see this. If I can chat. Meeting. This a quiz of what can CRISPR actually do, and I'm going to share my screen, and you can think about this here as well. And I'm trying to remember. I did this now a few times in the last couple of days, so I'm trying to remember what the answers are. But these are different questions of CRISPR, this is now, as I said, this is several years old, but these are different questions of CRISPR. Has this already happened? Is it hypothetically possible, or is it pure fiction? And you can be taking this here as well. But I'm going to do this here. Can CRISPR, which is a medical technology, I can't even remember. I can't even remember what it's an acronym for combinant. Boy, I can't even remember. I was looking at it earlier today. It is a technology that allows you to be able to. It's almost like cut and paste on a Word document, able to go into your gene line here. And so CRISPR, if we think of CRISPR as what we might say is some sort of genetic technology, do you think CRISPR could create a mushroom that is exceptionally slow to brown? And you can think about this, and hopefully everyone had their answer here. If this has happened, the answer is that it's already happened, right? We're able to create a mushroom that's able to have a slow something down. It's able to, as I said, they're able to create white button mushrooms that don't brown as quickly after being sliced. These are genetically modified organisms here. And we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So that's something that's already happened. Is CRISPR repair a mutation causing a deadly disease in a human embryo? Do you think that's already happened, hypothetically possible, or is it pure fiction? Oh, Arlene, yep.
Already happened. Everything is going to be already happened. It's so obvious. Yes.
It has already happened, right? That's right. This is something that happened a few years, and we think about genetic technology, but this is more knowledge that we're gaining of these questions of being able to, as I said, be able to offer the option to repair the DNA of an embryo instead of discarding it. This would ensure that it won't be passed on. So now, would CRISPR-Cas9 technology enable blind adults to see? So
I think it's either A or B.
I would love if people want to jump in and see what they may guess here. Sandra, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
I thought I was talking to myself, but I was guessing that yes, the answer is yes, that it may have happened in some blind adults.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to see if this is the answer. I think the answer is that it's hypothetically possible.
Hypothetically possible. Okay.
It's not. It is not. It's right there. These are now. This is an interesting question, and I want to explore in a minute. I want to unpack a little bit and hear people's reactions to this. But blindness and deafness, and also things along the lines of autism or Down syndrome, right? Is that something? And this is our society has changed the way it views these kinds of things, right? Like if blindness or deafness or autism or Down syndrome, are those something that we sell that there's something that should be fixed, or are these something that is part of who people are, right? It's not a simple question, right? If you were to ask people in the deaf community, if you ask people in the neurodivergent community, ask people like ADHD, right? These are and blindness and deafness are big questions in Jewish law and halakha, of being able to say you shouldn't put a stumbling block before the blind or the deaf. There are certain elements where a priest can't have certain physical defects. Could we go in and change blindness and deafness to be able to, is this, thinking about it at the very beginning, is this a question of therapy or is this a question of enhancement? Which is an ethical question, but this is a hypothetically possible question. All right, next one here. Can CRISPR make yeast glow by inserting a gene from jellyfish? Has this already happened? Is this hypothetically possible, or is it pure fiction? And you can answer this yourself.
Don't know.
And I believe the answer is that it has already happened.
Already happened. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just I'm just gonna mute everyone here. You can unmute as people want to be able to jump in here. So that's this is one of the other things too that is incredible about everything from CRISPR-Cas9 technology to I have not yet done but you could do Ancestry or 23andMe. One of the things that is really incredible about a lot of these new genetic technologies is not that they are being done. People have been able to do some sort of genetic technology for a long, long time. We'll talk about this. It even goes back to biblical times. What has really changed is the cost, the level of access, right? You can buy kits online for less than $200 to make it easy to insert a gene from a jellyfish into yeast and thereby make it glow. Right? It's been possible, but it was much more complicated for the average person. $200 is like, it's not much, right? This is an easy thing to be able to do. What about CRISPR making malaria-carrying mosquitoes extinct? Does it already happen, hypothetically possible, or pure fiction? You can think about this for yourself. And the answer here is hypothetically possible. And it comes into this question of what should we do with species, right? We human beings are able to change animals. I think I might have mentioned this before. I teach in a variety of different places, so I can't remember if I said this, but there's a book by Yuval Harari, who I quote a lot. I was reading a book with him with my kids called Unstoppable Us, raising the question of why are human beings the most powerful animals on the planet? And one of the things that he brings up is that if we wanted to, or more accurately, lions continue to exist on this earth because we let them. If we wanted to, human beings could eliminate every lion on earth. 200,000 years ago, lions let humans live. But because our ability to be able to create the technology in our social world, we're able to decide what happens to all species on this earth. And so, we could make malaria-carrying mosquitoes extinct, which could be a wonderful piece for humans. And yet there are also questions of what might be unexpected consequences. Right? You never quite know. One of the things about the web of life is that everything is dependent on everything else. If you remove one source of food, what happens to all the other sources of food? Whether it's wise to introduce these changes to mosquitoes in the wild without fully understanding the consequences is widely debated. So, right, it could be great for human beings to be able to eliminate malaria, but it raises this, another question that we think about in Judaism of is this something we should do? So here's another question of CRISPR. Could CRISPR-Cas9 technology knock out bipolar disorder? Does it already happen, hypothetically possible, or pure fiction? Oh, people are sort of talking through for themselves. This is pure fiction, and we'll talk about this here. Is that questions of behavior are not simple. These are not easy questions to be able to look at. This is, as I said, something when it comes to something that's very clearly caused by a mutation of a single gene. The answer is hopefully yes. Like sickle cell disease is one typo, but bipolar disorder, it's not clear what and how many genes are involved, and it also raises these questions. And we think about this a lot with physical health and mental health. Right? There are elements, and this is this question of how much is therapy versus how much is enhancement. Right? Wherever you are with your mental health, there is both an element of talk therapy and there's often medication that happens. Is the medication, is that something that is therapy or is it enhancement? And this is right. This raises a variety of different questions. Right. This is one question that comes up that's become a big question in schools and camps. Right? What are different diagnoses that come up, and the medications that are placed to be able to deal with ADHD, to deal with bipolar disorder? to deal with anxiety, to deal with dyslexia. How much of that is trying to fit kids into a pre-existing box that says this is how you should, this is what the norm should be, and I'm going to give you medication to get you to this point, or do the medications, are they necessary? These are not easy questions to be looking at. So here's another about halfway through. Can CRISPR-Cas9 technology turn Chihuahuas into Great Danes with just a few quick and targeted gene edits? Already happened, or pure fiction? And if you're thinking, right, it is pure fiction, right? The second part is you're not going to go with one fell swoop and change and poof, it'll magically appear. You have to map the genome of each breed, identify the thousands of differences, and to be able to look through different targeted ways. You can't just change an animal species from one to the other. So, could it make babies immune to HIV? And you can unmute if you want to sort of jump in and hear what people's thought process is. Yeah.
I thought I had read somewhere that they had been successful in some cases, not across the line.
So
I would say hypothetically possible.
Hypothetically possible. Yeah, that's. Anyone else want to take a stab? I believe that it is. Yes, it is. That's what I thought. It was a hypothetically possible. Yeah. That's right. This is right. This is right. But given our knowledge of how genes work, even seemingly positive tweaks could have a vast array of unforeseen negative consequences.
Right. Yeah.
How about this is one that comes up of designer babies. Enable parents to ensure that their baby will grow up to be a genius with supermodel looks and a creative streak as soon as boutique fertility labs are legal.
I hope pure fiction.
Right. And this is pure, right? Because this is good. And we're going to look at some of the Jewish law of this, of how do we define questions of intelligence, beauty, creativity? One of the things that happens with Jewish law is there's clear distinctions of this is somebody who has this part of this, or this is a yes or a no, right? Is somebody a child or an adult? Is somebody they'll make decisions of? Is somebody blind or deaf? Like what are the different laws? But being able to say what is somebody who's intelligent? That's a harder question. That's not a simple question here. Right, and even complicated heights like hair color or height are more complicated here. What about, do you think CRISPR-Cas9 technology could create a deadly version of smallpox that's resistant to vaccines and wipe out millions of people?
Wow.
The answer to this one is
hope not.
It is hypothetically possible.
Hypothetically possible. Oh, that's terrible.
And although, as they say, many of these can do these bioterrorism without CRISPR. But again, it's relatively easy to learn, right? This is this question of just because we do something doesn't mean we should, right? These are questions here. And then could CRISPR turn a small coastal town in Argentina into a destination for bespoke gene editing solutions? And here it's hypothetically possible. Again, not surprising that you can send people down here. Again, different laws. Again, these are questions of one of the things that CRISPR-Cas9 technology became a big challenge was that it was done in China where there was without a whole lot of oversight and regulation versus the United States. So what happens if when there are different rules that come in? And the last one is, could CRISPR change bacteria from beige to dark blue? And this is something that has already happened. So this is something that's a little bit easier. This was actually something that was done by a 13-year-old 6 or 7 years ago. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Hopefully you were able to take the little quiz yourself here. But I'm curious, as people took this quiz, what surprised them in doing this little experiment here? what were some areas in which you did this and you were either pleasantly surprised or unpleasantly surprised, either from what is actually being done and or what the ethical considerations that come in? Oh, yeah.
Dave?
Go ahead, Arlene.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I know. Let's have Dave and then Arlene. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Well, just that much more has already happened than certainly than I expected, and this was done 6 or 7 years ago. So it shows that the rate of growth is really much greater than most of us can comprehend.
So what's interesting, I think there's two parts of this. One is that that there's some of this has already happened and that was quick. And yet I believe, and I'm pretty sure that most of the stuff that was hypothetically possible 6 or 7 years ago, if you had said to me when you took this quiz in 2017, will this have happened by 2023? Probably many of us would have said, yes, it would have happened by now. And it hasn't, right? There's a lot of the things that we get scared about are things that we have always been scared about here. So that, right. So there are questions of genes and genetic technology and ethics are also big questions of scale. So, changing a bacterium is pretty easy, actually. Being able to deal with like bipolar disorder or even blindness and deafness, that is so complicated that it is hypothetically possible, but the practical elements of it are so complicated that it may not be actually feasible. Arlene and then Judith. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. My concern is with a lot of the material that's going on right now, whether it's Apple's version of Pro headset, which sounds like it's fallen apart and that it's very costly and they may have to refigure it out again. But there are some interesting articles that are emerging right now on GMOs in general and concerns about what's going on with our diets and whether or not we're putting ourselves at some risk because people are, in many cases, driven more by the financial gains than by taking into account the beneficial aspects of something.
So you're raising, this is another question that comes up a lot, and we've talked about that. We're talking about this a couple of weeks ago as well, which is private versus public.
Yep.
This was also this was a question where we have private companies looking at everything from space flight to artificial intelligence to when science is funded by the public sector, it tends to be a little bit more pure research and ideally the benefit of society. Private companies often do it for their own financial reasons. The flip side is that private companies are able to right, and as Rebecca says, the pharmaceutical industry, the private companies are able to advance much more quickly than the public sector as well. So there is a higher danger that comes in, and there is potentially a higher benefit, and that's where a challenge comes in. Yeah, you were gonna. Oh yeah, Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, and this is bringing up something that's different, but in a way similar because it's technology and it's creating something that doing things like cloning, which also is a kind of thing where you're creating something out of an ear or a human cell, and it's another where you're making a choice. You want to have a dog that's exactly like the one you have, which of course has been done, and it's another technology that where we're not modifying, but you're creating a new life in a way. It has some similarity.
So and actually we're going to look in a second at a couple of texts. You brought up an interesting distinction, which is modifying versus creating. Is there something is there a difference of something creating something out of nothing? Or is it taking something that already exists and changing it and modifying? So right, if look, again, I remember this was now almost 30 years ago, where there was cloning Dolly the sheep, if you remember that,
Right.
in Scotland,
Right.
which this is a little bit of why I'm not a techno-utopist or a technophobe, because people were saying 30 years ago, if you remember, when Dolly the sheep was cloned, it was a huge, big ethical question of what is this going to mean about our society, and what if humans are created, and like nothing, right? It has not really impacted our day-to-day lives. What actually has changed our lives so much? Social media, right? Like that's something that right, there are elements of what's the fear of artificial intelligence? Is it going to take over and destroy the world? No. What's going to be a bigger problem is deep fakes that's going to influence the 2024 election, right? There's a lot of large fears that we look at, and there are elements of what we're actually looking at that where the edge cases, I think, become fascinating. But it comes down to this question of what does it mean to be human, and what are the godlike powers that we are creating.
Just one more point with the cloning. Can you clone a child? I mean, that's
Right.
that's the danger part, and that's the scary part. And I don't think it would that go into the hypothetically possible. I don't know.
Right. No, I don't. So, and this is one of the things that I think has become a real difficulty of talking about genetics, being, people talk about genetic, like I have a genetic predisposition to X or Y or Z, or my genes are telling me this or that, which then kind of explicates personal responsibility or environment. And right, if people will say, "Oh, I did X or Y or Z because my genes were programmed to be able to do this," that says, well, then it's not my responsibility. In fact, the question, and this is a good analogy of this, of people say, it's not genes or the environment, it's the interaction of the genes and the environment. So if you were to look at a car being driven, and you were to ask, how fast is this car driving? There's two different elements of this, or how good is a NASCAR race car driver. It is both a combination of what the car is and the driver is. It is not one or the other, it's the interaction. So if you were to clone your child, if you were to be able to restart your child's childhood, that child would be, elements would be the same and elements would be different because the environment would be different, right? How they respond to different stimuli would be different. One of the things about genes is that there's randomness to it. So when people do studies of genetic similarity of genetic twins and identical twins, there are similarities, but it's about 50%, which also means 50% is about environment. And that's right. People can have different elements there. Karen, yeah, go ahead.
In addition to those questions, I'd like to add another one, which is about using genetic engineering for a cure or for prevention. And I feel totally differently about those two. If somebody were to present with a disease and there were a genetic cure, and there are, I would go wholeheartedly in favor of fixing it. And so I don't know if you've included that in your, or is this all about creation?
No, that is a question of you're asking a question of like, is somebody a disease in utero versus presenting later in life?
That's right.
So I'm not sure. Like, so do you think there is a distinction of trying to create a cure for a disease in utero versus if you've got sickle cell anemia in utero versus, or Tay-Sachs disease or something along those lines, stopping that before a child is born or afterwards? You see a distinction between those two?
Actually not, because if you can, and we do, use tests that are prenatal to find these diseases, and then obviously people can make decisions about continuing their gestation. But the thing is, to prevent any known or predictable misery is just fine, and also to cure such a thing is fine.
So,
I think so. Doesn't that address your question of what's more or less necessary, and that kind of thing?
So I mean, this raises this question of if we were to, and I don't think this is, but yeah, let's do with a hypothetical question of if somebody is predisposed to be blind or deaf, would it be acceptable ethically and in terms of Jewish law, do you think, of trying to prevent blindness or deafness in utero, right? Or is there, and because there's also a question of consent, right? If somebody at 23 who's been blind from birth says, I would like to have sight, in my mind, that is a different decision than deciding for a child in utero before they're born, where there is no consent. Is there a distinction of making a decision about some sort of medical treatment before a child is born or afterwards? Yeah. Go ahead. What were you going to say, Karen?
Wasn't sure it was somebody else. I would say that ask a parent. A parent would want their child's life to be better than their own, and or should. And better is a qualitative term. So I understand that there are strengths in developing other senses, but I think there should be some panel of people, some group of people that could make that decision, such as a rabbinical group or somebody who's ethically inclined to help with things like that. Yes, prevent. So I'm push it backwards to prenatal, and take care of it if it's going to be a burden.
So I'm intentionally being a little bit provocative here, and I want to open this up. Of what about sexual orientation? Would it be okay to be able to change someone's sexual orientation at birth? Right, it'll be someone's life easier, right? Right, could say societally it's a lot easier, and yet, but I think many of us would say no, right? That's not something that we would want to necessarily change. So it is a question of but if you were to, and here's the interesting question: if CRISPR-Cas9 technology existed 60 or 70 years ago, or if you were to ask, let's say, Orthodox Jews or fundamentalist Christians, do you think it would be okay to be able to change someone's sexual orientation in utero? I think they would have a very different decision than what a Reform rabbi would say. Of whether right, that which is so the questions are not. It's not a simple question because, as Karen was saying, there should be a panel here. Well, who's on the panel? Who's making that decision? Right? It's a similar analogy almost of questions of abortion before that's right. Who is making a decision of whether a mother can have an abortion or not? It is going to be very different to be able to have a right-wing fundamentalist Christian on the panel versus a liberal Reform rabbi. They're going to have very different decisions about this. So it's not as simple as, okay, let's have a panel to be able to decide. I think the bigger question is who is making these decisions. Yeah, go ahead, Arlene. Oh, you're muted though.
What is the current view from Orthodox rabbis about young people who are struggling with sexual identity? What's their position? I know what the Reform position is, but I don't know the Orthodox.
It's a great question, and this is also what is interesting. so first of all, I think there's a range in Orthodox Judaism from like Chabad to modern Orthodox.
Right. Sure.
And I also think there is a shift. There is a change that is happening. So I went to Hebrew Institute of White Plains, which is the Orthodox synagogue in White Plains.
Sure.
And they just rebuilt their sanctuary there. My son, who's 8, never really been in an Orthodox synagogue, walked in and there's a mechitza there. There's a barrier between men and women. And I explained to my son, right, when you go to an Orthodox synagogue, the men are on one side and the women are on the other. And he said to the Orthodox rabbi, what about somebody who's non-binary?
Ooh.
And the Orthodox rabbi said, we've got a solution for that. Here in the back, we've got a slider that people can sit however they want to decide in this way, right? So,
Okay.
It comes back to this question, Karen, of you saying of who's making the decision, right? So Rabbi Chaim Morder at Hebrew Institute, who is a more liberal Orthodox rabbi, is going to make a very different decision than Chabad rabbi in Kiryas Yoel, right? And right. So,
For sure.
And that one of the things that happens is with a lot of these kinds of questions is that it comes in both different directions, right? So this is where science and religion come in. Some of the questions are top down, and we're going to look at a text in just a couple of minutes. Some of the questions are top down of here is what Jewish law says, and this is what we need to be able to do, and that's going to guide the science. But sometimes it's bottom up. Here is some new science. Let's change what our halakha has to say. And some of these different questions have changed the way that we look at sexual orientation and transgender. Right. This is why, like LGBTQ. That's why, at least in the reform movement and most of it, lesbian and gay is that's very accepted. Transgender is very accepted in the reform movement. It's a little bit more controversial as you move towards the center because there are still questions of the genetics of it, that's where there is discussion and also consent. Right, these are why these are complicated questions because they're questions of who we are and questions of what we're actually able to do and questions of identity and questions of consent. Right, this is why like questions of abortion. These are questions where these are questions that are new in the last 15 years, 20 years, 60 years, 100 years, right? These questions didn't exist as the new medical technology has come in. Right? This is my daughter came at 35 weeks. The medical technology allowed her she survived a lot better. Right? If a child comes now at 27 or 28 weeks, the medical technology allows us to be able to have that child survive in a different kind of way. That's where abortion is it's not as simple a question as life of the mother, life of the baby. There is a question of viability, right? If a child comes at 24 weeks, 23 weeks, there are some ethical questions, there's halakhic questions, but there's also medical technology questions that come in. Sandra, go ahead. Oh, you're muted. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you went past this, but I wanted to know in that hypothetical that you previously raised, what would the dog, what would the Chabad rabbi say to that with regard to the non-binary person sitting in his or her synagogue?
So as with most religions, the farther right you go, the more conservative you are. So my guess is that most and Chabad is it's an organization. It's a little more complicated here. My guess is that they would try as much as they can to be able to be accepting, and at the same time would not necessarily allow somebody to, as we would say, be fully themselves. Right? They would not necessarily allow for somebody who is transgender who are in the process of transitioning to be identifying in their new gender, for example, in the way that a Reform rabbi would, right? It tends to be a little bit more more right wing, but again, I think there's, as almost every religious tradition is trying to understand, with what do we know genetically, what do we know societally, and this is one of the things that comes up with a lot of questions in science and ethics, which is what they call the naturalistic fallacy, which is just because something is natural doesn't necessarily mean that's how it should be, right? If we lived in the natural world, we wouldn't have houses, right? We wouldn't be able to have medical technology. If we let nature take its course, we would die, right? That's right. So there are ways in which trying to understand of this is what is. I think a lot of, and we'll see that there are some very traditional rabbis who would say nature is what it is. This is what it's been forever, and we can't ever change it. So that's what they would say, like transgender is not okay. But as people have understand more of the science of like, well, hold on, gender is different. Gender fluidity is different here. That there's an interplay of genes and society, right? There's our understanding of who we are is a much more complex cocktail, for lack of a better word. So we shouldn't just say like, well, this is the rule and this is the law and period, end of story. We need to understand a little bit more complexity here, and also to be able to say there are competing values. There are values of like, well, I think inclusion is a higher value here, right? Even if right, this is which we can say, reform rabbis would probably value inclusion more than Orthodox rabbis would, if that makes sense, right? Like
Yes,
that's.
thank you.
So, other thoughts here before we look at a couple of texts. So one of the things that's interesting, and I'm going to share. Hold on, I want to be able to pull up the right text here. Of CRISPR-Cas9 technology, which again comes to it's questions of gene editing. It's a question of identity. It's a question of also mixing and genetically modified organisms, GMOs. This actually, the questions of GMOs even comes up in Genesis, and we were looking at this a little bit actually. If you were with Torah study a couple of weeks ago, this is a story of Jacob and Laban. Jacob and his uncle Laban, where Jacob is working in Laban's fields and wants to be able to get more of his livestock here. Let's see, Dave, can I have you to read from Genesis 30 here? But you're muted here. Yep, you're muted.
He, Laban, said, "What shall I pay you?" And Jacob said, "Pay me nothing if you will do this thing for me. I will again pasture and keep your flocks. Let me pass through your whole flock today, removing from them every speckled and spotted animal, every dark-colored sheep, and every spotted and speckled goat. Such shall be my wages. In the future, when you go over my wages, let my honesty toward you testify for me. If there are among my goats any that are not speckled or spotted, or any sheep that are not dark-colored, they got there by theft." And Laban said, "Very well, let it be as you say." But the same day he removed the streaked and spotted he-goats, and all the speckled and spotted she-goats, every one that had white on it, and all the dark-colored sheep, and left them in charge of his sons. Then he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob was pasturing the rest of Laban's flock. Jacob then got fresh shoots of poplar and of almond and plane, and peeled white stripes in them, laying them bare the white of the shoots. The rods that he had peeled he set up in front of the goats in the trough the water receptacles that the goats came to drink from. Their mating occurred when they came to drink, and since the goats mated by the rods, the goats brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted young. But Jacob dealt separately with the sheep. He made the animals face the streaked or wholly dark colored animals in Laban's flock, and so he produced special flocks for himself, which he did not put with Laban's flocks. Moreover, when the sturdier animals are mating, Jacob would place the draws in the trough in full view of the animals so that they mated by the rods. But with the feebler animals, he would not place them there. Thus the feeble ones went to Laban and the sturdy to Jacob. So the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks, maidservants and manservants, camels and asses.
So Jacob does genetic engineering. Right. The science is not right. The science totally is completely, I don't want to say made up. It's not going to work that way, but it is an attempt of Jacob saying, I am going to try to change the genetic makeup. I am trying to create designer sheep. I want sturdier sheep. I want woollier sheep. Right. And I think it was you was talking about questions of the finances, right? Jacob is not doing this out of the goodness of his heart. He's not doing this as a scientific experiment. He's not, what is he trying to do? He wants more money. He wants more resources. And so, and by the way, how is this text viewed? Is Jacob viewed positively or negatively for this work?
I don't like it.
Yeah. So I'll get to you in a second, Sandra, of that you don't like it. How does the text view it?
Neutrally.
I would say neutral. I would say neutral to mildly positive. Right. It doesn't right, because there are other texts where they call him a trickster and another different. Right, he's called a trickster in a variety of different ways. Laban tricks him. That the Torah is not shy about calling out different people and saying like, and he got angry or he lost his temper or did this doesn't say, and Jacob by deception got more of these different flocks. He just said this is what he did, and he got a lot of stuff. Like,
and also positive for him in that he was smart. He knew what he was doing, and he accomplished a task that he wanted to accomplish. However, morality-wise, he took advantage of someone who was not complaining, but certainly he got the best of the experiment. And so I would say there is judgment and certainly interpretation, as we all do with the Torah. There's lots of interpretation, and I wonder if most of the interpretation would say that he took advantage of Laban.
He did. So this is one of these questions of knowledge of what do we have and what do we not have, which is one of the questions with the sheep, but also to an extent with Laban. And these are questions of particularly with genetic engineering, of questions of knowledge and consent. One of the things that came up, and you may know about this, of the Tuskegee experiments in the South, I believe in the 40s and 50s, where the U.S. government did experiments on African Americans without their knowledge or consent, and understandably there is, at least particularly in the African American South, there is hesitancy and resistance to medical interventions, understandably, because there was not consent here, there was not knowledge. We look at questions, whether GMOs are actually good or bad is a different question, but there's a reason that now almost every foodstuff either says GMO free or being able to feel like, are these genetically modified organisms? There's questions of how the animals are treated. Right. There are questions of how cows and cow hormones are developed for milk, right, to be able to know what is happening to the animals that is there being treated humanely. So it also raises these questions of power of Jacob has the power to be able to impact these sheep and goats without really caring about the sheep and goats and how any stress they might have felt, any stress and distress here.
Is there interpretation that follows this? What's the next?
Yes. So why don't you hear me read? This is actually from. I'll have you read here. This is from Psalm 8, and then there is an interpretation. There are different interpretations here, but this is from. Go ahead. So,
is it still me?
oh no. Hold on. Let me. Hold on 1 second. Let's see. Hold on 1 second. Judith, why don't you read for us here?
What are humans that you have been mindful of them, mortals, that you have taken note of them, that you have made them little less than divine and adorned them with glory and majesty? You have made them master over your handiwork, laying the world at their feet, sheep and oxen, all of them, and wild beasts too, the birds of the heavens, the fish of the sea, whatever travels the path of the seas. Adonai, our God, how majestic is your name throughout the earth.
So it's from Psalms, and the rabbis talk about this, and this is, you have made them master over your handiwork, laying the work, sheep and oxen, all of them, and wild beasts too. So the rabbis say that, yep, this is, so go ahead.
That you have made them little less than divine. This refers to Jacob, for it says in Genesis 30:39, and since the goats mated by the rods, Reb Hoshea explains, he would draw an image, and just as he drew, so the seed formed in the water of their wombs, and so did they give birth. This teaches that Jacob lacked only the ability to give them a soul. That's
right.
Interesting.
So this I would say looks at it very positively here, right? Jacob says, boy, the only thing Jacob couldn't do, he couldn't make, and this is Nifash. I should make this flush right here, because there's the Hebrew. The only thing they couldn't do was create a soul, but Jacob was able to act as God did, right? Like this is, you have made them little less than divine. And we talked at the very beginning in our very first class about the role of technology and technology being a human creation. And that one of the things that we do when we act in God's image is to create, is to use technology here. This is not viewed negatively, or at least being able to have the sturdier sheep and the sturdier oxen. Other questions here about the story of Jacob.
The point is that he gave lesser animals to Laban. I mean, that seems wrong, to take the best for yourself and give the other person, and intentionally give the other person a weaker flock, more. It just seems wrong in some way. He's got credit for doing it, but it's what he did with the results that I think is morally not a good person.
Well, you're bringing up one of the questions that has become a major question, particularly in genetic engineering, which is questions of access, which is and questions of AI as well, which is the rich get richer. But people who have access to different technologies, the more they're going to be able to build off of that. But one of the things about CRISPR-Cas9 technology and with artificial intelligence, ChatGPT as well, it's democratizing the technology in a different way. There's a share. Hopefully, I can share a little bit. If not, I'll send it along. There was a question of there was a law in California saying do not do genetic experiments on yourself. because you can do different technology, being able to understand doing a swab to be able to know what your genetic predispositions are. But at the same time, the democratization is not always a good thing. Again, I don't know about you. This happens to me. I go to the doctor. I get some sort of test result that's a little bit unusual or mildly concerning. And it's going to be a few days until I actually meet with the doctor. And I Google either my symptoms or I Google like this thing is high or this number is low. And I get very scared. Right. And the democratization of knowledge is valuable because I can at least know what's going on. And at the same time, the doctor is the one who has a level of expertise. So Jacob is taking advantage. He is becoming richer here, but he also already has that knowledge. And if Laban were to be able to know, here's what the genetic technology is going to be, would that have been a little bit more democratic, a little bit more equal?
Can I just say that do not do unto others what you would not want them to do to you. That's isn't that our rule, our golden rule, and what we live by, and what Hillel said, that's all you have to know. The rest is commentary.
Right. Well, so, and it's interesting, we're going to look at that text actually in just a second. Right, the rabbis say that what is hateful to you, do not do to another. True. And so, and Jacob is not always viewed so positively in our tradition. This is not necessarily thought of as the best thing ethically. And at the same time, there is at least 3,000 years ago, or at least 2,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, when these texts were being written and creating interpretations, there was a recognition that animals give birth, they're genetic, they change a little bit, and we can change them. We have the development of farming is genetic modification. Developing of dogs is genetic modification. These dogs are evolved from wolves, and it was over thousands and thousands of years that humans were able to sort of domesticate dogs. We've also domesticated ourselves. Humans domesticated ourselves. They're like genetic modification is something that is very, very old in our texts and traditions. I think the question now is it's a difference of degree and not kind. It has become something that we're able to do much faster and cheaper, and we don't always know the ethical implications. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
It seems that a common theme through many of your problems that you've posed to us is the need for good regulation. And that came up last week. I think it's going to happen again. And when you mentioned the Tuskegee experiment, I realized, oh my gosh, because they had the ability, they decided to try it without the consent of the people involved. Now, why couldn't that continue to happen with prenatal procedures? If our science advances so much that we can prevent hundreds of diseases, won't that be done automatically? Won't that be done before you're even asked, right, as a set of parents? So it's just that the regulation, once again, can be steps behind the invention, and I don't know how that problem is solved in a general way, except by giving a lot of smart people the opportunity to work together, and people of different backgrounds and different skills, and in liberal arts as well as science.
And again, I don't think there's a bright line here. So my kids are 10 and 8. They have had their full vaccination schedule up, everything from birth until 10 and 8, and they've had their COVID shots, and they have done it without their consent. Right. That's right. And I think all of us would be perfectly happy to not have measles, to not have polio, to not have smallpox. Right. There are ways in which we have eliminated medical diseases. Ringworm was a major problem in the American South for decades. Malaria. Right. There are ways in which we have eliminated diseases, and we view that positively. I view that positively. And so there are questions of where we as a society make a decision that we are going to do things against people's consent for questions of public health. And that does raise some ethical questions. We can't go into this whole decision, but there's lots and lots and lots of discussions of the research from the Nazis on Jews, is that data, first of all, is it good scientific data? That's one question. B, even if it is good data, quote unquote good data, should we be using it, right? Because of the way it was collected. Questions of consent and regulation are very, very complicated, because it's not just questions of individuality. There's also questions of people's rights as well. Like one of the reasons that for example we pushed so hard for the COVID vaccine. I think everybody here took the COVID vaccine. It's not just to protect ourselves, but to be able to create herd immunity. The COVID vaccine was developed with genetic technology. That was right. I think the COVID vaccine was a good thing. That's I think as a whole. So we tend to be scared about genetic technology, and it's very much part of who we are. So I want to look at another text where we look a little bit negatively here. Let me see who's Anne, would you be able to read for us? This is a little text of Leviticus. Why don't you read Leviticus 19:16, and then I'm going to stop you in a second.
Do not deal basely with members of your people. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow Israelite. I am Adonai.
So that's often described as do not stand idly while your neighbor bleeds. Leviticus 19 is called the Holiness Code. Okay, keep going.
You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kin, but incur no guilt on their account. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow Israelite as yourself. I am Adonai.
All right, so I said, love your neighbor as yourself. I'm assuming everyone's heard this phrase, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Everyone's heard, do not stand idly while your neighbor bleeds, right? You may have heard, don't hate your kinfolk, but reprove them. You may have heard that a little bit as well. These are all rules that we quote all the time, right? The Reform movement loves these quotes, right? Everybody loves these quotes. The next verse after love your neighbor as yourself, we love this. We use this all the time. What's verse 19?
You shall observe my laws. You shall not let your cattle mate with a different kind. You shall not sow your fields with two kinds of seed. You shall not put on cloth from a mixture of two kinds of material. So
I'm going to thank him. So how many of you knew that the next verse after love your neighbor as yourself was this verse? Right? That's so what is verse 19 trying to say?
Somehow there's a purity in certain kinds of animals and humans that we should preserve. That's what it's saying, I think.
Yeah, don't marry out of the tribe, stay separate. It's
right.
It's a very separatist kind of a statement. Yeah.
Yep, it's right. There's boundaries. Yep. So Karen and then Sandra.
Sandra, you go. I didn't have anything.
Okay.
That verse 19 concerns me
Okay.
because I don't know whether people would interpret that as relating to people, for example, racial intermarriage and other kinds of separations of which and use this kind of biblical passage to keep people separated from each other and help.
Yes.
What do you think, Rabbi?
Yeah, well, Anne, yeah, I'll respond. I want to get Anne, yeah.
Sure, there's no question. It stays separate. This might be the strength of the people too. We've stayed separate always, and part of it, I think, it led to the fact that we've survived as a people. I'm not for it. My children both intermarried. They're both Jews. They were growing up Jewish grandchildren, but not by the path of we stuck to the same religion. So, but definitely, it seems as though that would be stick to your own and don't mix, which certainly is not my philosophy today or ever.
So. Yeah, I mean, so this is it makes us a little bit uncomfortable because of the analogy here. So there's a few different pieces of this. One is there always has been in Judaism a separation, right? There is Kodesh, you shall be holy, which is this called the holiness code. Is Leviticus 19. Holiness means separated out, right? When you say kiddush, you are separating Shabbat from the rest of the week. Or there are, and the people of Israel are designed, particularly in biblical times, to be separate from the other nations here. That is now where it becomes interesting, and is what are the, and we'll look at this in a second, of the Hebrew is et chukotai. The chukotai are statutes. Judaism talks about two different types of rules. There's chukim umishpatim, a chok versus a mishpat. A mishpat is a law that just makes sense. We're actually in the middle of this week's Torah portion right now of mishpatim. There are a variety of different rules that make some sort of logical sense. Right? If there's laws of damages, there's laws of marriage. There are a variety of different laws that, right, you don't need to be able to have a divine command saying don't steal. You don't need a divine command to be able to say treat people kindly, right? Like we know that. But there are some rules of where they just make no sense, and we observe them just because we're supposed to. There's also, this is one of the things of fielding with two kinds of seed. And then there's in Deuteronomy, they talk about shatnez, of not mixing wool and linen together, which again makes no sense. There's no sense here as well. So this is designed to be able to say there is a separation. I think this is a difference because this does talk about the animal and agricultural world rather than the human world. Letting your cattle mate with different kinds. This is actually Ramban, Nachmanides, who is a thinker around the same time as Maimonides, Rambam, who said, "You shall keep my chukotai. They shall not let your cattle mix with a diverse kind." And this is the reason for this prohibition against kilaim, which is the mixed kinds, that's what it says. Like you shouldn't mix the different elements, the different cattle, the different flax, is that God created in the world various species among all living things, both plants and moving creatures, and God gave them a power of reproduction, enabling them to exist forever, as long as, blessed be God, will desire the existence of the world. And God further endowed them with a power to bring forth only after their kind, and that they should never be changed. As it said to reference with all of them, at the beginning of Genesis, everything was created after its kind. This driving force in the normal mating of animals is for the sake of preserving the species, even as human beings engage in sexual activity for the sake of having children. Now, we understand science very differently than what Nachmanides said, right? And things we understand, Darwin was able to understand, like species are not static. Animals are not static. And And genetics is not to be able to preserve the species. It's to be able to say everything exists in its own way. And so, says those who combines two different species, therefore changes and defies the work of creation, as if one is thinking that the Holy One, blessed be God, has not completely perfected the world and desires to help it along in the creation of the world by adding it to new kinds of creatures. So Nachmanides says very clearly, mixing species, no go. Absolutely not, under no circumstances. Excuse me. Says from the point of view of these two matters, the changing of the order of creation and the sterility, the act of combining different species is despicable and futile. Even when diverse species of vegetation are grafted together, their fruits don't reproduce. And so he says God has prohibited the mere sowing of diverse kinds of seeds because their nature and form change when they derive nutrition from each other, and thus each kernel of it, as it were, grafted together of two kinds. Similarly, God has forbidden to plow with an ox and a donkey together because it's customary among the tillers of the soil to bring their working animals into one cattle shed, and there they might come to meet with a diverse kind. So that comes to, this is something that I think we probably would disagree with this statement here, because it comes to this question of separating everybody out. Everything needs to be in its own place, and trying to do, this is where Nachmanides falls into what I think we would call the naturalistic fallacy of just because this is what something, it was natural doesn't necessarily mean it's good. Yeah, Arlene, go ahead.
Okay, I think that the Torah has been dealing with the fact that man seems to have his own mind from the time of the Garden of Eden. And this is one way of restating the importance of God and that God is in charge, not man.
Yeah, right, exactly. I think that's right. That's which is why these questions this is why I phrase this of is genetic engineering is allowing us to play God. Right there, there is a question of, we sort of laugh at like why shouldn't we mix different animals together, right, and create donkeys? And at the same time, if theoretically, if I were to say let's create a human chimp hybrid, we would probably recoil at that. Why? Right, if I were to say, do we want a human chimp hybrid? Right, we would probably say that's not natural. That's violating God's rules, God's laws. So these questions of when we talk about genetically modified organisms, these are questions where we're like, are we playing God? Are we violating nature? So when we first read Ramban, we might say, whoa, wait a second, why is he so strict against why is he so against bringing two species together? And at the same time, these are things that are happening right now. I'm going to pause here before we look at a couple of short little texts to close. I'm curious of all the reactions to Leviticus and Ramban here, or other questions that.
A while ago, I had a conversation with an ultra-Orthodox young woman, and I was able to ask her, why do you keep kosher? And she said, because it's a limit, it's a boundary.
Right.
It's something that there is no scientific reason. It is something that I accept as a boundary, and everyone has boundaries, and this is mine. Right.
There's not everything is a scientific fact. There are some things that are social facts, religious facts, and that's right. Creating a limit there's a social element of this.
And can I just add also, there's a respect for God or the divine when you're keeping kosher. The part of it is the recognition when you put a hat or a yarmulke on. There's a respect for the sanctuary. So it also, that I think that's also part of anything kosher,
right,
that it makes you think of. something
Right.
beyond yourself, beyond the mundane. It's holy. There's a holiness to it.
And that's right. That's one of the things of particularly like kashrut and circumcision, for example, which some people will say, well, that's what they had for medical reasons. Now we understand medicine. We don't need to do it anymore. When in fact, laws of kashrut and circumcision are not about medicine. They're not about health. They're about ritual elements, creating boundaries. But if we were to say circumcision existed because of health, then yes, then circumcision is not needed for medical reasons anymore. Is it needed for a Jewish ritual piece? Yes, right. That's why, and at the same time, there is a medical element of this. This is why most Mohalim, for example, are now OBGYNs, because they've got the medical training to be able to do this. So I want to come towards a close of looking at, this is a really fascinating article that we can look at of CRISPR technologies. It's from about a year ago, Jewish legal perspectives. Jonathan Loic and Rabbi Tzvi Flaum, and they are, from what I understand, they are both Orthodox Jews, and it's going to be, you'll see what they talk about the use of CRISPR-Cas9 technology. So can I get someone to read here?
All right. In general, the rabbinical consensus is that the application CRISPR for medical reasons such as diagnosis and disease treatment will take precedence over any possible Jewish ethical objections inherent in the technology. Many rabbinical decisions, arbitrators of the Jewish law, decisors, follow the opinion of the famous commentary of the Mishnah, Tiferet Yisrael, which states, anything where there is no reason to forbid according to Torah law is permissible in Jewish law and needs no justification. For the Torah has not enumerated all possible things,
all permissible things,
rather the Torah focuses on forbidden laws.
So I'm going to pause. So they say CRISPR is not only can it be used, it should be used. It will take precedence over any Jewish ethical obligations, because a lot of Jewish law, instead of saying you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, it says these are the things you can't do. But unless it says don't do this, it's permissible. So it tends to be, actually, these are traditional Orthodox Jews who have, in my mind, a very, very liberal perspective on medical technology. Keep going here a little bit.
Another important Jewish guideline is the role of human beings to partner with God to improve the world and conquer disease. This guideline is articulated by several biblical commentators, such as the Ramban and Rabbi Shimshon Hirsch on verse 7 in Genesis 9. Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that creeps upon the earth. Ramban and Rabbi Hirsch understood this verse to mean that God gave humanity the right to use all natural resources, inanimate and animate, for use to better the world and fight disease. Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik expands this position by stating that all stories in the Torah point to a moral lesson in humanity. The description in Genesis that God created the world serves as a moral directive that God instructs humans to be creative and use their creative talents to partner with God and preserve and improve the world.
One more paragraph here.
The above-mentioned ethical guidelines serve in conjunction with the critical commandment that everyone, especially physicians, must do whatever is possible to save human lives, and ethically justifies the use of CRISPR in medical therapies and in diagnostic tests. While some scholars and some secular and religious scholars discuss the possible ethical issues of playing God, this is not a Jewish ethical issue in cases where saving lives is critical.
Does this surprise you? It surprised me a little bit of their view on CRISPR-Cas9 technology.
Yeah.
How so? How would like what surprised people of this law of this text?
It's so open. It's
Yeah.
It's like, be careful of what you wish for, because certain things can come up that this is a very, very open approval. Yeah.
Maybe too open.
Yeah.
It seems too open. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's and yet it tends to be. Now, again, some of this is, comes back to this question of who's on the panel that's deciding, right? So we would expect that. So, for example, the reform movement on a lot of different topics tends to be more open, and so it needs to be a little bit clearer of like, here's what we can't do, right? If there's a teshuva or responsum from the reform movement, the default is probably going to be, yes, you can do it. And the reform movement needs to be able to rein it in a little bit, to be able to say no. In the Orthodox movement, it probably is, the default is no to an extent, but we need to be able to expand it. We need to be able to say yes. Again, to be able to create the balance. There's always a balance of progress and conservatism. Sandra, I saw your hand for a second here.
I put it down because I think that's fine. That
You think the use of medical technology here?
Yes, why not?
Yep. Well, and this is this last piece, and I'll read this here. This is from the same source. This is one that surprised me a lot, which was another ethical issue that Jewish legal decisors need to address using CRISPR to enhance the human condition, that is enhancement, or to create designer babies, that is babies with a specific hair or eye color, with high intelligence or enhanced athletic skills. Here, the Jewish legal discussions regarding plastic surgery to improve one's appearance may serve as a Jewish legal precedent to address the use of CRISPR for non-medical applications. Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg argues forcefully against pure cosmetic surgery for two reasons. First, the Torah does not give physicians permission to practice their craft in a non-healing context. And second, these procedures violate the command that one is not permitted to wound oneself or others for no medical benefit. But in contrast, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who's actually a very important Orthodox rabbi, interprets the Maimonides' prohibition of wounding oneself and others as applying only when doing so in a contentious manner. Cosmetic surgery is usually done to undo the humiliation being suffered with bad appearances, and therefore would not be considered a violation of wounding. Right? Most people do cosmetic surgery. There are a lot of people who do cosmetic surgery to reconstruct after an accident. And in addition, plastic surgery does not usually result in significant health risks, and therefore can be permitted with rabbinic approval. Many rabbis also take into consideration psychological reasons in their analysis of Jewish law, and believe that normative appearances such as pierced ears or liposuction are allowed to be done when the patient has legitimate psychological concerns about their appearances. Moreover, cosmetic surgery or dyeing one's gray hairs are viewed as permissible according to Jewish law, if the person believes this will help preserve their jobs or make them more effective at their role, at their jobs. The rabbinical permissibility of allowing cosmetic surgeries creates a rabbinic precedent and offers guidelines to allow the use of CRISPR technology for non-medical or enhancement procedures when these enhancements will mitigate psychological or employment issues, which is fascinating to me. This is Because you would think most people would say, no, 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 we can't use enhancement, we can't use enhancement. But again, it comes to this question of enhancement and therapy is a little bit different. So there are several other issues that require rabbinical input. For example, can parents use CRISPR to alter the genes of embryo to have blue eyes or enhance their intelligence? If the parents are currently living in a Scandinavian country where blue eyes and blonde hair are the norm, can they use CRISPR to produce children with blue eyes and blonde hair so their children will be more accepted into that society? To date, rabbinical scholars prohibit the use of genetic engineering in creating designer babies where there is no medical benefit. And this is one of these questions I'm going to stop sharing here. These are not simple questions, right? We may want to say, like, medical therapy, yes, enhancement, no. The reason this is such a complicated question, why Jewish law, I think, is really interesting of looking at these questions, is that there is not a bright line. What is the baseline here? If we say, what is the baseline changes. And what is my baseline is different than what is your baseline, as we were thinking about at the very beginning. Everything from questions of sexual orientation, neurodiversity, blindness, deafness, right? There's a question of what is quote unquote normal. There isn't one, right? Society decides what is normal. One of the great examples that I love about this of the analogy that people talk about of homosexuality is left-handedness. Because if you think it happened before I grew up, but a lot of people, if they were born left-handed, what were they forced to do? Use their right hand, right? They born so some of it was society changed to be able to accommodate left-handedness. It's the same kind of people. People are understanding all sorts of new genetic questions, but they're not simple questions, right? In my mind, these are not simple yes or no pieces. There are we didn't even get to a lot of questions of genetic knowledge and genetic ancestry and the privatization of genetic knowledge, about can we live forever? These are questions that it is always worth exploring the interplay of the natural world and the social world. We can't just say this is what has happened naturally and that's what it should be. But we also shouldn't just say, here's what society is. People need to fit into what our society has to say. There is a back and forth. There is a dynamic that changes here. And so that's one of the things that we're going to look at next week, of how are we looking at the questions of the future, of what is the future of the future. That is what we're going to be looking at for next week here. So any last thoughts or questions from this week?
All right.
Well, thank you. I'll upload this also for our YouTube video, and looking forward to our last class next week.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you then.
Early Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.